All right. Well, Siobhan, I'm so excited to have you here. It's going to be awesome to dive in today all about creativity and how we make room for it, how we make time for it, why we need it in mom life, and all of that. So thank you so much for hopping on.
Oh, thank you so much, Renee. It's been such a pleasure coming on to your show. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I know that I was already on your podcast. So
Mhm.
if people haven't tuned in, they can go over there and check out that episode on your podcast, The Unlocked Creative. But for those of people that are just now meeting you, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I am a mum of a delightful 4-year-old daughter, and I'm based in Canberra, Australia. I love writing picture book stories and podcasting. And most of all, I love helping women to find their creative outlet and make time for it in their lives for soul restoration and life transformation.
Mm.
I feel like it's part of ourselves that is, can sometimes fall to the bottom of the list.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually a form of self care that I think can be really easy to deny. So I'm
Yeah.
all about reawakening and helping women reconnect to their creativity.
I love it. I love it. And I'm so excited because I think creativity is so powerful in so many ways. And like we've talked about, I think is it can just eliminate this stress and worry about creating self-care. Like we can just get into these flows and it just creates this so much more alignment in us and all of that. So how, first off, like how would you describe creativity? Like what does creativity look like? Because I know there's probably a ton of people listening to this that would raise their hands and be like, I'm not creative, I can't do this, this is not the episode for me. And I'm sure that if you're listening and that is you, stick around because there's going to be so much that we share in how creativity can be adapted for you and what that looks like. But I just want to kind of hear from you. Like, what is creativity?
Oh,
I know that
so
was a big question.
creativity has so many definitions. So if you look up creativity in the dictionary, or if you kind of go and scout out all the people, all the gurus, all the experts, everyone who studied creativity, everybody will have a different definition. Essentially, the essential elements are about um, being open to new or novel, exciting ideas, and then being able to connect them together in a way that is authentic and not original, because authentic and original are different things.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what it really is about is bringing ideas and life into the world in only the way that you can. So,
Mm.
creativity is actually part of who you are, it's part of your genetic makeup. And I say that because the neuroscience actually says that the creative process, the process of coming up with an idea and then evaluating it and seeing whether you might want to do something with that idea, is actually built into our brains. It's wired in. So everybody is creative. I think the part that people get tripped up about is actually, what do you do with that creativity?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's two things there. There's what is creativity, and am I creative? Yes. So the answer to the second question, yes, yes,
Yes.
yes. And then the second part of that is, okay, that's great. Now what do I do with that?
Yeah. Yeah, well, and then the other part too, I think, is a lot of times is people may get caught up on this idea that it has to be perfect, right? Like that it has to be done to a certain
Mhm.
element. And so I think that perfection might also hold people back too. So how have you seen perfection play in with creativity and in when working with people in terms of creativity and perfection?
Mm. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story here, because basically I struggled with perfectionism for most of my life and have only recently discovered in the last couple of years that, my values were perhaps not really established, or I didn't really know what they were.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up kind of doing, like, all of the things that I was doing in my life was about achievement and outcome. And, my career was in communication and marketing in government. So, there was always this pressure to produce a thing, to produce
Mm-hmm.
something tangible. And for me, what happened was I thought early on in my career, well, what I'll do is, because I'm a writer, I will just, I'll throw myself into my career, and then, my desire to be creative will be fulfilled. And for a little while it worked, but then I found that I wanted to write my own stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
at the end of each day, I was just coming home feeling drained and I just couldn't do anything with my creativity. And this continued for years. But what happened to me was I realized that what I was doing was actually avoiding my creativity, and it was
Yeah.
all about perfectionism. It was all about fear of what might come out on the page when I started to actually write properly. Excuse me. So for me it was all about fear of what would come out on the
Mm-hmm.
page. For some people, the women that I work with, it can be about fear of what other people might think of you, even though they may never see your work. It's
Mm-hmm.
up to you. You actually open the door to allowing people to see what you do and what you create. So it is actually within your control. And I think a lot of perfectionism what it comes down to is control and a sense of, this has to be perfect
Mm-hmm.
before it can be good enough to be in the world. And it actually comes down to your own sense of worthiness. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like with creativity, it's a fascinating process because you start off with mess,
Yeah.
right? No matter what you do, you start out with mess. And, Anne Lamott is a great writer, and she speaks about having, I don't know if I can curse on this so you can like edit it out, but she talks about starting with a shitty first draft. So you have to allow the mess to happen
Yeah.
before you can do the refinement. And that is the hardest part for anybody who has that kind of achievement drive, desire to produce an outcome from their creativity or just anything they're doing in life. So
Mm-hmm.
I think I've kind of skirted around this a little bit, but really it's about letting go of the outcome, practicing being, because I
Mm-hmm.
feel like creativity is actually about a way of being. It's not about doing.
Yeah.
Yes, some of it is about doing, but it's like the core precept of, creativity is really openness to allow the ideas to marinate within you. And
Mm-hmm.
then, so you need that space. You need that
Mm-hmm.
space. And feeling pressure and feeling like you have to have an outcome closes in. So it actually creates a very closed mindset, which is not conducive to that initial idea generation phase of creativity, which I should say initial, but it actually comes up later in the process as well when you're thinking about connecting other ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know if I've, kind of covered that in, a way that is, it's not clear
Yeah.
cut, I guess
Yeah.
is what
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
saying. Yeah.
No, yeah. And I like kind of how you pulled into like that, this feeling of like the openness, right? Like, and even just yesterday, I was talking about this with somebody this morning, is that my daughter was we were walking home and she was like, Mom, how come when I sit down at my computer, I just can't think of what I want to write. But when I go outside and I go for a walk, it's like everything starts to flow. And I was
Mm.
like, gosh, it's true, because you've let your brain have that little bit of space. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes that perfection keeps us from like you said, like opening up and letting like the ideas to flow, or
Mm.
letting the creativity to flow, or we're worried about what it's going to turn out like or what it's going to look like, so we don't even start, right? So we
Mhm.
get caught up in that. But aside from just that idea of perfection and not knowing where to start or what, or like how it's going to end up, there's some tension there and unsureness about like, where do we even start? If like we'd like to be creative, we'd like to do something,
Mhm.
but also let me go back. Why is it important for us to tap into this creative part of ourselves?
Oh, so
I was going to say, you talked about that it's a part of each one of us, right? So for those that maybe don't resonate quite so much with the creativity, but like for all of us, why is it so important?
oh well, so I think to start with, I touched on this a little bit, but we live in a society where productivity, well, where doing stuff is valued much more high, like it's valued more than
Mm-hmm.
being. So we have a lot of stuff going on all the time in our lives, and it's a lot of it is just noise in the background. But creativity is learning to let go of the doing and learning how to be. And I think
Mm.
how to be with yourself without any
Yeah.
distractions. And that can sometimes be very painful. If
Yeah.
you haven't, you know, if there's some kind of, and I say trauma, but like, I mean, you know, not just big T trauma, like,
Yeah.
so I can give an example here. So this is a bit of a bit of a moment probably in this discussion, but my mum and I survived the 2004 tsunami. And so for me at the time, that was a big T trauma. But we have these little traumas throughout our lives. Like, for example, I myself was bullied through high school. And like with my writing, I never really addressed it. And when I started to address it in my life, you know, working with a therapist and whatever, was I able to actually open up the channels to my creativity. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like definitely everybody has hardship, right? But it's about learning to be with that discomfort, because no
Mm-hmm.
matter what what you're creating, you will have a voice, and not a, you know, I'm not talking about mental health here. I'm talking about you'll have an inner voice
Yeah.
that is always trying to protect you. So the inner critic, which I think you've mentioned on your show before, but the inner critic is basically a protective mechanism that each of us has. And it gets quite personal when you're creating. So that can come up even before you start to create, like
Mm-hmm.
me. So I didn't, you know, I didn't write for years because I was afraid of what would come out, because I was afraid of being vulnerable and afraid of experiencing pain, and pain through either my own kind of reliving of my experiences or of what others would think about what I was doing. So judgment, and also internal and external judgment.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's my number one thing is, like, it can be really painful to actually start. Um, but the benefits of creativity are immense. They can be restorative in the sense
Mm-hmm.
of you're creating this beautiful space just for yourself to stop and pause and reflect on what's actually happening in this moment. So, like your daughter was saying, you know, why is it that, you know, I can't write here, but when I'm outside, I can write there? Because nature is soothing.
Mm-hmm.
Because,
Yeah.
you know, it's like connecting with all these beautiful elements of self care enhances your creativity.
Yeah.
And when you're in your creative outlet, what it does is it is you acknowledging a part of your soul. You know, it's you actually honoring part of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So that generates really positive energy, not just for that creative session, but in so many other areas of your life. Like, you will
Yeah.
start to notice things will start to pop out to you that you have always been there, but you've never seen them really before. You've never
Yeah.
noticed them, really seen them. And, you know, you'll pay attention and you'll hear little things that maybe you may have missed before. It might be a way that a phrase that somebody uses that you just love. You know,
Yeah.
it's all these little things that actually start to light up once you start your creative outlet. So I said it can be a painful starting process because it's messy,
Mm-hmm.
and not just the creative work, but like the internal work that you're doing just by starting can be a little bit messy. But once you get through that, the benefits for you personally are immense. The other benefits include things like actually modeling, taking the time for yourself and your
Mm-hmm.
creativity, modeling that for your kids. Like,
Yeah.
that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
You know, and it doesn't have to be, you know, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be writing a novel, or you don't have to be painting a masterpiece. You can sit down with your child and play Lego or Play-Doh and just lose yourself in that time. That is a creative practice.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think there are a number of beautiful benefits that come out from being creative. And, you know, if you wanted to go all the way back to looking at this pressure in society to be productive, well, actually creativity is beneficial for business and entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurship, I would say, is creative by
Yeah.
design.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
mm,
Well, and I think I really loved the phrase you wrote, like light up, because I feel like that's so much of what creativity does is it lights up and it's like almost becomes fuel, right? And then it precipitates into all of these different areas of our life where because we're filling ourselves up and we are feeling lit up in this one area, it does trickle into all these other areas of our lives. And I loved how you kind of tied in just there at the end, because that was going to be my next question is like, we've talked a lot about writing, and then you brought up painting or masterpiece or things like that, but that creativity is more than just like painting and writing. So I loved that you brought in the Lego example or Play-Doh, because I think sometimes that even like that just opens up this whole new world of like, oh my gosh, there's so many options to be creative. And so I don't know if you want to throw in, if you have any other ideas of like what that could look like for somebody that maybe is sitting there feeling like I'm not super creative. Like, what does that creativity potential possibly look like?
mm. Yeah. So, I mean, I love to sort of talk about this example just because it's a little bit different to what you might expect. And so my husband teaches science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And he is like, he loves spreadsheets. And, you know, I'm like, okay, that's great. You know, I kind of use them occasionally from time to time in my day job, but as a tool. But he gets right into it and, you know, creates all these data visualization, like with all colors. And he's like, oh, look at this. Do you want to look at what I've just made? And I'm like, sure. Yeah, that sounds great. But actually, when I look at it, I'm like, there is a lot of work that's gone into here. You know, he's thought really carefully about like how this connects with this bit and like how someone might perceive that. And, you know, that is creative. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're into coding, if you're into, I know that somebody that I've interviewed on my podcast spoke about, so they actually designed games. So
Mm-hmm.
like online games,
Mm-hmm.
and they created the storyline for those games, and they also were a coder, and then they became a picture book writer. So, you know, creativity is not it's a very broad, and like I said, it's we can't actually pin down the exact definition. There is no one definition for creativity, but
Yeah.
at its core it's about, you have an idea and you take things and you decide whether you want to run with that idea and then make something. And so that is why I'm not giving very very clear, you know, it's like you could be doing Lego, you could be doing Play-Doh, you could, but my number one piece of advice is start where you are. And
Yeah.
the reason I talk a lot about writing and drawing is because they're probably the easiest in terms of tools, easiest things to use to get started. So,
Okay.
you know, most people will have a pen or like your laptop, right? You have a
Yeah.
laptop or, you know, iPad, whatever. And you have these tools available, readily available to you. You have paper. And so you start with writing. You might
Mm-hmm.
just start with writing, you know, about how you feel about, I would start with the senses. So,
Mm.
you know, what can I smell? Like I have a beautiful candle here right now and it smells like caramel and makes me want to eat stuff with caramel in it. And I must be hungry, and that's a bit sad because it's the morning here. But, you know, going astray there. But, you know, taking in the senses, what you can smell, what you can see around you, and, you know, what you can hear,
Mm-hmm.
um, starting there and just starting with what you observe,
Yeah.
and trying to express that to someone. Um, and it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have somebody in mind, but just how do you feel about that and how do you put that into the world? And
Yeah.
that's all you're trying to do. And nobody has to see that. This is you taking the time. And I would suggest only starting with 2 minutes,
Mm.
simply because, you know, even 5 minutes, I think people are like, well, 5 minutes, I could be making my cup of coffee. And it's actually quite a long time standing there waiting for the kettle to boil and that sort of thing. But 2 minutes is like, yeah, you know what? I can't even really have a shower in that time. I know I can't. So 2 minutes is achievable. It's also great because quite often what will happen, and I'm not recommending this, is that you will go over the 2 minutes without even realizing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that would be my advice, is just to pick one thing. And if you can't, because like writing and drawing are really quite easy things to start with,
Yeah.
pick one thing, let go of the outcome of what you're doing. You don't have to show this ever to anybody. You don't even have to pick it up and look at it again.
Yeah.
Take the 2 minutes. If you're really, really stuck on what to do, what I would suggest is actually thinking about, what did you do as a child? So,
Mm-hmm.
what did you do where, you just went off, didn't even think about the time, you didn't even notice whether you were hungry or not? Were you making, like, I don't know, mud pies or in the
Yeah.
garden?
Yeah.
Or were you, what were you doing? What was the thing that you loved to do? It might have just been singing a song without anybody hearing you. Whatever that thing is, try and think about how that made you feel, and maybe the other things that you've done that make you feel the same way, and
Yeah.
start with that. Just start with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you kind of pulled in those like small little chunks of time, because that was going to be my next question is like, for most of the moms that are listening, we feel like there's probably they feel like they have very little time to squeeze in. And so I
Mhm.
love how you kind of pulled in those short little spans and just do it simple. And then I also feel like when you brought up that the examples that you were talking about, like my 5-year-old has been very much into coloring lately. It's been her like new forte. We have this little side desk that's sitting right here next to mine, and she'll stand here and just color and color and color forever, and then color on the couch. And so sometimes she'll say like, Mom, will you color with me? And the inner part of me is like, no, I have stuff to get done. And then the times that I have sat there and just like colored in a Mickey Mouse coloring page with her, it's like there is something very cathartic about just sitting there and coloring with her. And for her, I mean, there's so many other benefits too, like just being in that presence with her, like makes her feel connected, and all the other benefits like in that relationship. But really in that moment, it's not just about her and her relationship and her desire to be with me. It really does help calm me. It lets me process like thoughts that I had maybe throughout the day. It doesn't require me to think really crazy. I'm not having to freehand draw. It's like just coloring in the lines. And
Mm.
how powerful and impactful something as simple as that can be when we let it, right? Like when we open ourselves up and create that space, like you talked about in the beginning, and how we can squeeze in those little micro moments throughout the day and then have multiple benefits stacked on top of each other. So it feels like we're hitting so many different positive wins in so many different ways.
Yes, 100%. So, for me, I know that one of the things that I noticed that I was doing was, actually, I spent a lot of time waiting in the car. I don't know how this
Mm-hmm.
happened, but, and it was probably more before COVID, but even with COVID, I spend a little bit of time in the car waiting for stuff to happen, like whether it's, my daughter getting out of a class, or, um, I don't know, waiting for my
Yeah.
husband to do something, whatever the
Yeah.
thing is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember this time when I was like, oh, I would really love to write right now. And then I thought, no, you know what? I actually have a pen in my bag, and I had like a grocery store receipt. So I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I can work with this. So I turned the receipt over, sat in the car, and just started writing.
Yeah.
And it was like, 10 minutes max. But I found that that was actually the start of my next story. So
Yeah.
those moments in between, focus on those. They can be very powerful. You don't need to sit there for 2 hours a day, or even 1 hour a
Mm-hmm.
day, or even half an hour a day. It's just about, do it in the in between.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And there's just been so much freedom in this. I feel like that's one of those things that so many women I think get caught up in, is that things have to be done a perfect way. They have to be done a specific way. It has to be another thing that's added to the to-do list. And in essence, I think creativity is so much about letting go of all those expectations and letting go of it has to be done a certain way. And there's so much freedom and it creates so much space. So I've loved having you on the podcast today and sharing all of what you've shared. Is there any other last little things that you feel like we haven't hit that you want to make sure we share?
Just thinking about that. No, I think really being intentional with those moments in between is really important. And if you're not sure where to start, just start with the 2 minutes. That's what I would say. Yeah, absolutely. And it's been a pleasure coming on the show and speaking with you.
I'm so thankful to have you on the podcast. If people that are listening want to go tune in and check out with you and hang out and get creative with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, so I actually have a free Facebook community called the Unlocked Creative Community, so you can join that. You can find me on Instagram at at unlocked_creative. Or if you just have a question, if you're stuck in your kind of knowing what to do next or knowing what to start on, you can drop me a line at hello@theunlockedcreative.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for hopping on. I hope that everybody walks away today feeling a little bit extra creative and feeling like they have some tools in their toolbox to be able to unlock that. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.